What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about my experience in the cloud computing market around the world over the last 5 years. So Virtustream is a venture-backed company. We started in 2009, and since that time we've grown our business to be a global business, and we focused on delivering secure, highly performing clouds across the world. We concentrated on large enterprise companies. So we specialized and we attracted well-known brands. So for example, you can see here that Coca-Cola Enterprises runs its entire US SAP estate on a Virtustream public cloud. And that's really quite something. I mean, Coca-Cola is one of the most brand-aware and actually the most security-conscious companies in the world because their brand is hugely valuable. And we also specialized very hard in moving into the public sector, so attracting and working with governments in both the US, the UK, and I'll tell you a little bit later about how I built some relationships with governments in the Middle East and in the Asia Pacific region. We concentrated on also working with service providers, and you can see that we worked with a Brazilian provider, UOL. We worked with Mobily, which is Saudi Arabia's largest telecom company, Colt, which runs 26 data centers across Europe, and a number of others. As Maxim said, we've done very well at positioning ourselves as a leader in cloud. And the real reasons that we've positioned ourselves as a leader is we did not try to compete with Amazon. I'll talk about this later, but we do not see ourselves in the same market as the Amazon and Azure space. Now, that doesn't mean we don't come up against them when we talk to customers, but we deliberately position ourselves as a secure, highly performant cloud for companies who care about security and their reputation. And after 5 years, this has put us really at the top. And really, we're a 400-person company. And yet we're outperforming companies like Hewlett-Packard, Rackspace, and CSC. And that journey ends in about 2 weeks' time. So 4 weeks ago, EMC decided to pay to Virtustream $1.3 billion to acquire our company. So that means in 6 years we turned $100 million of venture capital, venture investment in the company into $1.3 billion. So we have a lot of very happy and very rich investors. So they're happy. Why am I here? I joined the company right at the beginning, so I've been with Virtustream pretty much through this whole journey. I started the business in the UK, and then moved to Saudi Arabia in 2012 to build cloud in a market where nobody heard of cloud. You land there in Saudi Arabia, and we worked with Mobily. And honestly, when I went to talk about cloud to customers, they would just look at me like I'd come from Mars or the moon or something. Nevertheless, we've delivered about $25 million of business in that market in the last 3 years, and I'll talk a bit about now, how we did that. I also did some work in Malaysia and Indonesia last year, setting up a cloud business over there. So what I'm going to do now is give you my thoughts on the market, who's buying cloud, why they're buying it, and some of the questions that I've been asked, and hopefully give you some insight as to how I've answered them. So, who is buying cloud and why? And I'm really going to talk about 3 sectors. I'm going to talk about government, I'm going to talk about enterprise, and I'm going to talk about SME, because I see them as buying cloud for, or trying to do a number of very different things with this technology. So if we look at government, if you look at, for example, if you look at Saudi Arabia and look at Indonesia, 50% of the population in both of those countries is under the age of 25. So there's a huge explosion in the need for healthcare, education, and the only way these governments can address that is through e-services. So whilst you may go to, if you dropped into Riyadh next week, you would see that the roads are very bad, but they have one of the most effective e-government solutions in the world. You have a number, you have a log on, and you can take advantage of a number of government services. And the way they're doing that is trying to invest in modern cloud-based IT. The other thing is that in the emerging markets, what I've seen in the oil-based economies, GDP from the SME sector is about 35%. So 35% of GDP in the Arab Peninsula comes from the SME market. If you look at Germany, that number would be somewhere towards 68%. And the SME market is where you generate innovation and you generate jobs. So governments are also looking to use cloud and cloud innovation services to drive enablement of new businesses, new business startups in the Arab Peninsula. The other thing that governments are trying to struggle with is to lay down rules around data sovereignty. Where should data be? Are we happy to allow data to go into Amazon Cloud based in the US or based in Ireland? And what will those rules be? You would be surprised to know that in most countries there are not yet clear rules around data sovereignty. But when you talk to governments, most of them are talking about enforcing or building rules that mean that financial data, personnel data should stay within the borders of that country. And so that means that you have to look, or countries are having to look to have providers to build clouds where the data stays within national borders. One of the big problems that government are faced with is shadow IT. Because government is slow, we have all IT employees are using non-approved cloud services. So I would go to speak to a CIO in Saudi Arabia and I would say, do you use cloud services? He'd say, nope. I said, okay, so you have nothing in Dropbox. None of your company data is in Dropbox. You don't have anything in SugarSync. Okay. And unsurprisingly, if you look at these statistics, the biggest offenders for breaking the rules are IT people. So really, you guys are all the worst people for doing this. We all do this, because we're the clever people, right? We don't need rules. So, and if you look, 24% of people using Dropbox have been hacked. And yet many government entities are using sharing sites like this. So if government can't get faster at deploying IT, its employees are going to do this, which threatens government and threatens national security. And these are the messages that I'm starting to have with government. And so you'll see as well, this is from Indonesia, IDC worked out that if you have an economy, an IT economy growing at above 10% per year, you can't build data centers fast enough to provide traditional IT. It takes 3 to 4 years to build and plan a data center. And if you're already at capacity now, the lack of physical data center space where people would do traditional IT and do it themselves is actually hurting the economy. So really, most governments are now realizing that I come across that cloud is the only option if they're going to deliver what their prime ministers and presidents are asking them to do. The question is how. So one example that we did, this is a real life example, is we partnered with SAP in the US and we formed a company called NS2. And this is a government service provider. So this company provides cloud services only to the US government. It acts like a public cloud. It looks like a public cloud, but it's just for the government. And that's a very exciting and profitable business for us. I'm actually we're working very hard now with the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Interior to do something very similar to this for the e-services in the kingdom. So governments are now looking to providers to build public clouds that service only governments in a highly secure and highly performant manner. So that's a little look at the government, and they continue to be one of the largest spenders on IT. My personal view is over the years, I don't think government's been particularly good at buying IT. I don't know what it's like here, but you know, most governments have, I can talk about the UK government, have made some very bad IT decisions over the past years. And so providers like us delivering cloud as a service to government allows them to stop trying to be IT guys and try and concentrate on running the country. Now in the enterprise it's worse. This is my little drawing of what it feels like to be an IT guy. If you're working, the CFO says, don't spend any money. You spend too much. The chief security officer says, don't take any risks. The marketing officer tells you, well, we're 2 years behind the competition. You need to bring out some new services. And the CEO is just confused. So he's just shouting. And the sad thing is that 85% of IT spend is used just to keep the lights on. So 85% of every dollar spent on IT is really just keeping that situation as it is. And nobody's happy with that situation. So if you look at the enterprise, the biggest thing really facing enterprise is innovation. I think that most of us, I mean, I saw this week it's only 8 years since the first iPhone. Can you imagine? 8 years since the smartphone was invented. Seems a lifetime. We all have smartphones. And this journey and this increase in the need to innovate is the biggest problem facing enterprises. They need to do more. They need to go for multi-channel strategies and so on. And this is a problem. And people say to me, does cloud, one of the things that I've seen in the emerging markets where jobs are important is people worry about jobs. Does cloud take away jobs? The answer is no, and I'll tell you why I think that is. This is a guy called William Jevons. He was a mathematician from the 19th century. And he figured out, he worked in the coal mining industry. And as steam engines became more efficient, people thought we would use less coal. So they thought that if a machine becomes more efficient, we would use less raw materials. And Jevons figured out this is completely wrong. The more efficient you make something, the more people use it, and the more you ask it to do. And exactly the same is happening in IT. Every time we make IT more efficient and more effective, we try and do more with it. And that's exactly what cloud is doing now. As we make infrastructure more flexible, and as we make infrastructure more cost effective, we try and do more with it. And one of the problems you'll see in the enterprise is that something like 65% of that budget we talked about is just locked up with test and development systems. If you look at storage globally, you think about how many terabytes of storage of data we store globally, something like 70% is non-production data. It's backup, it's archive, it's copy of production data. And so what enterprises are looking for is the ability to innovate, and that's what I'm selling to organizations globally. I'm saying I will help you get to your objectives by being able to innovate faster. Now, with innovation comes risk. Everyone thinks that cloud is a risk. Is that true? When you talk to your customers, do they believe that cloud is a risk? Yeah? Well, it's interesting because there's some interesting people. This guy here, this is King Priam. He was the guy who had the first Trojan horse virus, actually. He was the king of Troy. This thing here, actually, this is the longest undiscovered IT hack in history. This hack lasted from 1939 to 1945. That's the German Enigma machine that the British spies hacked. These guys, this lady's the CEO of Target. They lost 45 million credit cards. Home Depot, I think they lost something like 50 million records. And this guy, by manipulation of passwords, lost Societe Generale something like 4 billion euros. What's interesting, nothing to do with cloud. Nothing to do with cloud. He's before cloud. Before cloud. Do it themselves. Do it themselves. Criminal. Nothing to do with cloud. The problem is we didn't have good processes and procedures in IT. Forget about this guy, he's before IT, but these guys, not good processes and procedures in IT to protect ourselves. Why is that? Well, I will argue that's because we try and do it ourselves, and we don't do it often enough. So if every company tries to do its own IT, you end up with issues. Gartner will tell you something like 86% of all firewall breaches are caused by incorrect configuration. Why is that? Because we have people doing IT that are not experienced. They don't do it enough. So I would argue that you de-risk your business by placing it in the hands of people who provide a modern secure and highly performing cloud service. You're actually taking risk out of your business. And in Virtustream, that was one of the things we worked really hard on. We knew that the first question anyone would ask us was risk. Cloud is risky, right? If we do it ourselves, we'll be safe. If I have the key to my data center, I will be safe. So I tell them a story. In 2012, Saudi Aramco is the world's richest company. They pump something like 20% of the world's oil reserves. They have their own air force. If you go there, they fly their own fighter jets above their compound, just in case anybody wants to try any funny business. In 2012, the entire, and Saudi Aramco does everything themselves. They have their own tier 4 data centers, redundant power, everything. 2012, they were hacked. They lost every system for 2 weeks. Every disk was corrupted, everything. Why was that? They were breached by software level security errors. So they had their own data center. They were doing everything themselves, but because they're not experienced enough in defending against these kind of issues, they were breached. That's a huge problem. It's a national problem. So when people tell you that doing it themselves is safer, I tell them the story about Saudi Aramco. So, the real world example. This is the post office in Saudi Arabia. They came to me and said they don't have any DR. They run the postal service. They run some e-ticketing solutions. We migrated the whole of they had something like 100 different systems and put them on the Mobile public cloud in 12 weeks. So we took them from having no DR to having a modern, secure infrastructure in 12 weeks. I'll come back to this, but one of the key things there is that, one, this service was in Saudi Arabia. Two, we have the professional services to help them migrate. I'll talk a bit about Amazon later, but Amazon's a great service for serving up virtual machines. But if you're an enterprise, how do you get your systems into the cloud? And if you have 100 systems like Saudi Post, some of them 25 years old, some of them 20 years old, you need help and professional help to make that move. We talked about healthcare. Medgulf is one of the largest Middle Eastern insurance companies. They wanted to, with the exploding market, they wanted to invest in a complete new systems and architecture. They chose SAP, and we delivered them a whole SAP landscape of 47 servers within 1 week of receiving the PO. Now, their business case was simply, if I do that physically in my own data center, it's going to take me 6 months to get the hardware in place. That's 6 months of lost opportunity. That's 6 months of customers who are going to Bupa or one of the other providers. That 6 months alone justified moving to our cloud. In the SME space, look at this graph. This is a graph from the UK. You can almost see that as IT becomes more accessible, the number of new companies and new startups grow. So what we're seeing is IT, flexible IT, meaning it's much easier to start companies, it's much easier to grow companies. And so what we did in Saudi Arabia is we built packages that we could sell to SMEs. We worked with partners who wanted to sell their solutions on our cloud. And one of the ones that we're particularly pleased with is myTaxi. So this is like an Arabic Uber. And these guys built their business and deployed that onto the mobile cloud, which was run by us. And this is now a very successful business and the first taxi app business that's running in Saudi Arabia. So let's talk about the people who invented the cloud, because there's no doubt it is Amazon. You know, and it's a clever company. But how I said we didn't compete against Amazon, and this is why I don't think we compete. One of the key things we do is we provide managed services on the cloud. Increasingly, as organizations move to a more modern IT, there's a good business case for not just doing infrastructure as a service, but offering the services around database, operating system management, and even some application management. So probably in Virtustream, something like between 30 and 40% of our business is managed services on top of the cloud. It's good for us, it's high margin. It's good for the customers because it allows them to do something else with their money, innovation. You can also see that Amazon has no onboarding or no migration service. So if you're smart, like everybody in this room, we can just swipe a credit card and get a server. And that's great, really good. But what are you going to do if you're running Oracle Financials and you want to run Oracle Financials in the cloud? Or you're running SAP Logistics? How are you going to move that into the Amazon cloud? How are you going to, how much downtime will you need? How will you move the data? How will you make sure that everything syncs up? What are you going to do if it doesn't work? So one of the key differentiators and why we've never really lost to Amazon is because we target the people who care about that. And the interesting thing is the people who care about that normally are the big customers who get security, they get performance, and they're prepared to pay a little bit extra for the service that we give them. If you look at performance on Amazon, this was a study done by, I think, Forrester. I think it was Forrester. You can see that for performance, system performance and disk performance, Virtustream performed much higher than the same workloads in Amazon. And the thing about buying from Amazon is you are buying a specification of a virtual machine. Okay? So think about that. Amazon will sell you 16 gig of memory, 2 CPUs, and some storage. I'm going to sell you an SLA. I'm going to sell you a performance SLA. Because really, who cares about CPUs, gigabytes, and storage? If you're selling to, you know, a CFO or a CEO, he cares about the performance of his system. And what I say, don't worry about the IT piece. I'm going to sell you a performance SLA. And if I don't make that performance, you can kick me. And if you look, people will tell you that, you know, Amazon is somehow cheaper. But when you look of all the add-ons, so when you think about when you buy from Amazon, the basic per hour number looks very cheap. But then if you want DR, there's no DR in Amazon. You have to do it yourself. There's no backup in Amazon. You have to configure it yourself. If you want extra IOPS, you have to pay for those. So when you start adding up and matching Amazon performance or what you need to spend to get Amazon performance close to a Virtustream cloud, you'll find that oftentimes Virtustream works out cheaper than Amazon. The problem is you have to explain that to customers, because a customer looks at the per hour price and doesn't see the hidden benefits of the sort of enterprise cloud that we sell. So I'll talk a little bit about some lessons learned now, things that I learnt. And I think the first thing I learnt was, don't assume that everyone understands cloud. And I would argue that nobody understands cloud. I don't understand cloud. It's a word that everybody uses, and it means so many different things to so many different people. What I would argue is that cloud is a delivery mechanism. It's not the outcome. So when I've been selling to people like Saudi Post or Medgulf or people like this, we've been talking about how cloud will help them meet their business objectives, how we can help them deliver innovation, how we can help them be more secure. I generally don't try and sell bits, bytes, CPUs and things like this, because nobody cares, really. I think that I found in the Arabian Peninsula and in Asia Pacific, lots of people who work in IT don't understand how much their IT costs them. So they don't even understand what it costs them today. So you have to be prepared to build business cases and build return on investment numbers for customers. I'll give you one story. I worked with a customer in, this was in Bahrain, and this guy wanted to deploy Oracle on our cloud. And he told me his budget. He was very proud of this budget until so I told him what it would cost on the cloud, and we were more than his budget. So he said to me, how is that? And I said, look, do you realize that your budget will not even pay for the power for your servers for the next 3 years? Forget about buying the servers. You don't even have enough money to pay for the power and the cooling. And when he started to think about this, he realized that actually, buying that service from ourselves, or Mobile as it was then, was a much better business case. But we had to work with him to explain what his costs were. The other thing is, what I found is that what people think are the weak points of cloud are the strong points. So security, backup, and DR are the first places that every organization has that problem. I guarantee 90% of organizations don't have quality tested DR and backup, which is the first thing you get with an enterprise cloud. They'll tell you they have, but when you ask them, so where do you back up to? And they'll show me a tape drive. So tape backup, according to Gartner, has a 27% chance of working if you restore from tape. That's like your medical insurance only paying you out every 4th time you go to the hospital, which is a pretty bad outcome. So we focused very hard on the thing that people thought was the weakness of cloud: security, DR, performance. And the last thing is, don't just sell on cost avoidance. It's all about innovation and what an organization can do. Once you can express the cloud in those terms, I think you have a much better chance of making it stick. So The last thing is you have to tell customers what they should be looking for. Don't assume a customer knows what a good... Don't assume customers know what good looks like, especially in a new paradigm like cloud. You have to tell them. And so this is what I would argue you should be looking for. High availability, good tier-rated data centers, good connectivity, DR that you can deliver with RTOs and RPOs that are world-class, disk-based backup, and genuine scalable pay-as-you-go models. I think if you can convince customers and show customers that that exists, which is accessible to them in their country, and you can deliver that within days and weeks, that was the game changer that we saw in the Middle East and also in Asia Pacific. So hopefully I didn't go over time. Hopefully that was about right. If anyone has any questions, I guess I'll be around later if anyone wants to ask me anything individually. But it's been a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for your time and good luck.